Hey everyone, this is Lomi, and today I'm going to be sharing a face-up I did on a Minifee Honoka, which I modified to have elf ears. This is a face-up that I'm doing for a friend, and she requested something really bright, so it's going to be interesting to work on. I start the process by mixing a custom brown using two different shades of gouache. I thin it down a bit, test it on some paper to make sure it's the right consistency, and then get started with lashes. I'm using one of my Winstonia Berry Wine brushes for the eyelashes on this doll, just because it's what I had handy. You can see right away one of the reasons that I really love using gouache is that it's really easy to remove mistakes, even if a mistake is just one single eyelash. I can go back over it with a water-filled paintbrush and completely remove that line while leaving the rest of the lashes intact. Right away, I think working on this winking head is going to be a lot of fun because I don't have to be as structured or perfect as I would be on other face-ups because her face isn't symmetrical. So while on typical sculpts you would want it to be symmetrical for the lashes and brows from side to side, I have a lot more wiggle room on this because one brow will need to be lower so that it's a more accurate winking expression. This really makes the whole process a lot more relaxing. For placement of the eyebrows, I usually try to angle up from the nose to the corner of the eye to see where the tail of the brow should be, but that seems a little bit low on this doll because of how big the eyes are, so I opt to go a little bit higher. You can see it takes me a couple of tries, but you can also see how easy it is to remove that gouache. After the very normal colored brows and lashes are in place, it's time to get crazy with some really bright eyeliner. I'll have to go back over the eyeliner at the end of the face-up to make sure it stays really bold because I'll be blushing over the top of it. But getting the paint down now lets me see where I'm going to need to put it later, and it'll also help the next layer of gouache that goes on top of the blushing stay in place really well without bleeding. It's easiest to do this at this stage because it's really easy to clean up the paint right now if I do make a mistake. I'm actually really happy to have a use for this color because I remember when I did my review of the Arteza gouache, this one was really bright compared to the other colors and I had no idea what I would ever use it for. Turns out it's perfect for this project. Most of the eyeliner goes on with my Camlin Pro brush, but some of it also gets touched up with Arteza watercolor brushes, and I also use a Princeton watercolor liner just to add a little more thickness, especially on the upper eyelid where it's really thick and I want it to be in deep underneath where the eyelashes will go. I'm not going to be putting eyelashes in this doll because she wants them to be hot pink like the eyeliner, and I only have natural colors, so that's something I'm going to leave for her owner. Once the eyeliner is in place, I start on the lips using a watercolor pencil. This one is actually a little bit darker than what I want, but fortunately I'll be able to layer lighter colors over this as I go. You can see here I've switched to a second watercolor pencil that's a little bit lighter and brighter for the next layer. After I build up a few layers of color, you won't be able to see that original purple that's a bit too dark. I also use watercolor pencils to add some eyelid creases, but those are mostly going to be hidden underneath the blushing when I'm done. They're just going to be very subtle lines. I have to admit I was a little concerned about the blushing stage, especially around the ears, because they were modified. Since they were airbrushed, the paint has a different texture than the rest of the resin, and it tends to reflect light differently, which can make it look more pink or more yellow depending on the light that you're in. Fortunately, it covered really well with a few layers of pastel, so it's nothing to be worried about. I started with peach tones on the ears to make it a little bit more realistic, and then I started with the pink. Pink went onto the cheeks and the corners of the eyes first, and then onto the ears, the chin, and a little bit around the nose. I also use peach to shade to the sides of the nose, underneath the lower lip, and under the nose. And then it's time to start on eyeshadow. For the eyeshadow, I'm using a really bright blue and a purple. The purple will hopefully match her lips. They're a little bit brighter in person, but purples never pick up well on camera. She'll have a little bit of color above and below her eyes. It's going to take me a while to build up the intensity I need. But since I'm really heavy-handed with pastels, it always works better for me to have one that's very chalky that I build up through multiple layers. You can see through the course of this video that I tend to put the color on really heavy and it looks pretty horrible at first. But as I blow off the extra and start gently buffing it into the sealant, it smooths out a lot and it's not nearly as intense as it was. In all, it takes about 4 or 5 layers of pastel to get the color that I'm looking for. You can also see how these colors distort the hot pink eyeliner, which is why I'll have to go over it again at the end. A big portion of the project is just building up color and blending it together to get a smooth gradient between the two shades. I use a couple different brushes for this. I use a chisel blender, a filbert brush, and also a big fluffy mop brush for watercolors that's really good for dusting off extra pastel and helping smooth out my blending. After that's done, I go in with a human makeup brush to do the eyebrows. To help reduce the intensity of the brown on the eyebrows, I also layer a little bit of peach over them. And now it's time for the fun part. I use a white watercolor pencil to sketch in some heart shapes across her cheeks. These will match the rest of her makeup. Once I have good placement and shapes that I like, I put in the first layer of watercolor pencil. It'll take 2 or 3 layers of watercolor pencil to get the hearts really opaque. Like with the gouache, these are my Arteza pencils, which I find blend really well and go on really creamy. Out of all the watercolor pencils I've used for face-ups, these are probably my favorite because of that creamy texture. It's really easy to use and I never have to worry about it scratching through the sealant. I fill the hearts in using bright blue, pink, and purple. And then you can see me going over them again. This is probably the 3rd layer for the hearts, and that's good enough, so then it's time to brighten up the eyeliner again. On the open eye to the lower lid, I add a layer of light colored watercolor pencil and then put some bright pink right over the top of it. Last of all, I add just a tiny bit of pearl powder. We decided that because the rest of the face-up was really bright and busy, it was probably best to keep it simple, so she gets just a dab of regular white pearl powder over her eyeshadow. And once everything is complete and sealed, we finish the lips with a little bit of gloss. Now she's done and she's ready to go home. Even though it was really bright colors and pretty different from what I usually do, this was a lot of fun to work on. Now she just needs to go home and get her upper eyelashes. That's all for today though. Thanks for joining me again. Bye.